Imagine if we lived in a world where everyone knows their value. Seriously, I want you to imagine our society learning to recognize that Black trans lives matter, that folks living with disabilities are more valuable than we have ever created space for them to be, and that immigrants have always been the key ingredient that gives America the flavor it so desperately needs, but often leaves out. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic society that uses very deliberate marketing strategies to make you feel less valuable than others who seem to have something that you don't. Charles Baudelaire famously posed that the greatest trick of the devil was convincing the world he didn't exist. But I would argue the greatest trick was convincing people they have no value and getting an entire society to dehumanize and devalue each other. It's heartbreaking for me to hear about a parent who would harm or worse yet kill their own child for being different, or to hear about the suicide rates, especially amongst LGBTQ plus youth. It bothers me so much because I'm a survivor of a suicide attempt. I was only 15 years old and had already received messages loud and clear from my church and from my own family that my life was not worth living. But oh, how wrong they were. And what a grave mistake I would have made if I had succeeded at taking my own life. I wouldn't be here today talking to you right now. The ripple effect that is my life would not have traveled around the world and touched as many people as I know that it has. And this is where I am adamant about the fact that I'm not special. Well, that's not true. I am pretty special, but so are you. The only difference is how prepared you might be to take on life's challenges and how you process some of the very inevitable pain. Because hurt people, but a healed person can have the ability to heal an entire community. So that's what I did. I had to heal myself first before I could truly be of any use to anybody else. So one day, as I was sitting in front of my altar chanting and crying because I had just received news that my mother's health was failing and that she could possibly fall into a coma. And I remember my first thought being, I could care less if she lives or dies. That thought alone made me cry even more. I resented my mother for breaking my heart. I mean, it was her, and at her request, that I attempted suicide in the first place. You kill yourself, or I'll kill myself was the ultimatum she gave me. Fortunately, I found a spiritual practice in Buddhism that helped me find the compassion and patience for a woman who had not shown the same to me. Truth be told, we were both in need of healing. So I packed up my life in Los Angeles and I moved back in with my parents in Racine, Wisconsin to help take care of my mom. And at that time, I was able to transfer my job from working at the Apple Store to working for the Apple Store online and from home. I worked the late night shift, and during the day, I drove my mom to her doctor's appointments. I picked up her prescription medications. I helped run errands, and sometimes I even helped cook. Although I'll fully admit, I'm never going to be anyone's Julia Child. I'm telling you, it was not easy. Some days we ended up in full-on warfare between me and my parents. Conversations and arguments spanning from their disappointment in me being a trans woman to the fact that I never finished college like my brother, who was the psychiatrist and military officer and FBI agent. Yeah, a pair of overachievers, my brother and I are. It just took me a little longer to get here. I had to take a few more detours, and I learned that detours might seem inconvenient, but nonetheless, they're actually a very important part of the journey. In 2011, I thought I had lost out on the opportunity to go after my dream of becoming an actor because I had packed up everything to move back home and take care of my mom. What I didn't know is that life was giving me an experience that I could tap into years later when I was acting out Candy Ferocity's final conversations with her parents in the FX hit series Pose. But first, I was going to have to go through a lot. I was going to have to struggle a lot. I moved a lot. But it was Maya Angelou's words that gave me comfort when she said that each of us has the right and the responsibility to assess the road which lies ahead and those over which we have traveled. And if the future road looms ominous or unpromising and the roads back uninviting, then we need to gather our resolve and, carrying only the necessary baggage, step off that road into another direction. And if the new choice is also unpalatable, without embarrassment, we must be ready to change that as well. So I eventually realized that my seemingly unstable life was preparing me to be able to pick up and go wherever and whenever life was asking me to. I had to build a life condition to be able to withstand and overcome the challenges. I learned that Buddhahood meant not only being able to be unswayed by difficulties or hardships, but being able to use them as fuel for purifying and strengthening one's own life. We Buddhists call it turning pain into medicine. Soon after, my mom recovered and was able to return to work herself, and I heard about a job opportunity in Chicago to develop a job program specifically for Black and brown trans people. I came highly recommended by several people in the community, but unfortunately, I wasn't a licensed clinical psychologist or a social worker, nor did I have a bachelor's degree, which was what they preferred. But it was my experience that if I could get the interview, I could get the job. And I did. While staying with my parents in Racine, Wisconsin, I would get up at 6 a.m. every day, and I would drive an hour and a half each way, sometimes even longer depending on traffic. Most times, I was the first one in the office. And even though it wasn't my responsibility, I would make sure to put on a pot of coffee so that it was ready whenever my coworkers arrived. I would then sit down at my desk and start to prepare for the work I would be doing with my clients that day. It was hard work, but it was rewarding. I was able to provide career coaching for cis and trans people who were coming out of incarceration or recently diagnosed with HIV, struggling with homelessness or drug addiction. I mean, none of these were easy cases. And the nonprofit that I worked for, they just got used to sort of ushering folks into this safety and sanitation certification program so that they can work in some kitchen somewhere. But it was my job to help them discover the value already there in their lived and work experiences and identify any and all transferable skills. I even helped some sex workers recognize they have better customer service skills than my cable company. Most importantly, I didn't underestimate them. I tried my best to think outside the box and use technology to serve my community. But I ran into so much resistance from my superiors who often worked against me, storming into my office, unplugging my computer from my desk because it wasn't a company issue computer, or watching me struggle to carry supplies while they sipped their coffees in protest because they didn't initially approve of my programs and methods. But when my methods proved to be successful, of course, they took credit for it as if they'd been supportive all along. I had urged them to let me teach computer skills. Everything from Mavis Beacon typing, child, the basics, to using Gmail, to graphic design and coding. But they told me that teaching these types of computer classes would be over the heads of the people we served. That gave me the motivation I needed to quit. And that's when I founded Transtech Social Enterprises. I was told by the CEO at the time of that company that I needed to understand that they didn't get into this work for the love of the trans community. They did so because they recognized the services they were offering weren't accessible to trans people. So when I quit, I told them that I would be starting my own organization and that I would be doing so for the love of the trans community. I wanted to show trans people, but also prove to myself that we are worth far more than the scraps that are handed to us. I was tired of people underestimating me and the communities I come from. So I told them, keep that $34,000 salary. And I set out to show that I was worth 10 times that. Now, of course, my parents were disappointed yet again that I was quitting a perfectly good job with benefits. But as my mother, auntie, bestie, Bevy Smith says, who walks away from a job that pays well, a bona fide good thing? I'll tell you who. Someone looking for a great thing, an inspiring thing, a creative thing, a feeling of freedom, a new dream. And I had the audacity to think that a Black trans woman's dreams mattered too. I had a vision that I'm determined to bring into fruition. One where trans people are able to put down their armor and return to their field of dreams. A few years later, that same company, now under new leadership, asked me to come back and be a speaker at their annual fundraiser. Now, had COVID-19 not canceled all my in-person speaking engagements, they would have paid me almost what my salary used to be for 1 hour of my time. Now, that is something I can only attribute to me finally recognizing my value. It took almost 10 years to get my mother to finally see me and prepare her for the moment in 2019 when we would stand together in our truth on TV on the Oprah Winfrey Network, where she bravely admitted to the world that she asked me to commit suicide. She shared how she hated that because of what her religion had taught her, that she had missed out on so much of my life. It was so important for those women to see how my mother had gone from point A to point B. She admitted that Candy's mother on Pose reminded her of how she used to be, but that she was grateful that she was able to learn and do better before it was too late. It's definitely not perfect, but as I said on that stage, my mother and I now have a happy, healthy, healed relationship. My mom eventually saw that her child is a gift to her and to this world, as all children are, especially queer and trans kids. So I want us all to imagine a world in which we teach every person that they have intrinsic value, that regardless of how they do in traditional school settings, that life has its own curriculum in store for all of us that can be curated and customized with respect to your own inherent skills. When you realize that there is no comparison to you, you find less of a desire to compete with others where competition is not warranted. When we're able to recognize our own intrinsic value, then we're able to see the value in other people, no matter what their gender, sexual orientation, or abilities are. Yeah, imagine that.